Maastricht is the capital city of Limburg, the most southern province of the Netherlands. Within the scientific world, Dutch scientists are well known for their studies in the field of astronomy and physics, and for its top research institutes in cardiovascular research. Synapse Incorporated is one of those institutes founded as a working group within the Cardiovascular Research Institute Maastricht. Founding father of Synapse is Professor Koen Hemke. He has been studying hemostasis and thrombosis for decades, seeking the answer on the question why and how does blood clot?
Everybody knows that when you cut yourself, then it starts to bleed, and after a few minutes the liquid blood becomes a clot. And that is comparable to milk that becomes cheese. And milk becomes cheese because there is an enzyme being formed in it, and blood becomes a clot also because there generates an enzyme called thrombin. And the amount of thrombin that generates makes how well the blood clots.
It is known that an inadequate oxygen supply in the blood, called hypoxia, increases the change on thrombosis. Patients rushed into emergency rooms often suffer from hypoxia, which can cause additional life-threatening situations because vital organs can damage or die because of the lack of oxygen. Dr. Bas de Laat is General Director of Synapse and an experienced amateur mountaineer. He climbed several mountain peaks in the Chamonix area, and doing so, the idea was born for a totally different approach on the investigation of the effects of oxygen levels on the clotting of blood.
Patients with hypoxia in the emergency room, they suffer from thrombosis. We don't know why. We don't know whether the underlying disease causes this problem or that hypoxia itself causes this problem. And that's why we started an expedition in Red Meets White to investigate the effect of hypoxia on blood coagulation. And the only thing how to investigate hypoxia, either to put them in an oxygen room, and our ethical committee would not allow that, or to go to the Alps.
The atmospheric pressure decreases as you climb a mountain, which means that there is less air to breathe. Less air means less oxygen, so one breath take delivers less oxygen to your bloodstream, and less oxygen to your bloodstream is what makes the Alps a unique location for the Red Meets White study. At least, that's the idea. Climbing Mont Blanc while stopping at various altitudes for testing. The expedition will be divided into 3 separate teams. One team will reach the different altitudes by climbing. The second one will reach these levels through cable car. A medical staff consisting of cardiologists, hematologists, and anesthesiologists will accompany these 2 teams. The third team is responsible for the logistics during the study. And of course, a mobile lab is needed to draw and test blood immediately after reaching every single designated altitude. The idea is to measure the effect of altitude and hypoxia on blood coagulation on 5 different heights, starting at 50 meters in Maastricht and continuing in the Alps at 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 and 4,000 meters. But the catch is, you have to draw and process the blood immediately, even at 4,000 meters, and no one is allowed to descend without excluding themselves from the experiment. And that has never been done before.
The uniqueness of our research is that we tackled several problems that could not be tackled in the past. And one of the biggest things that we tackled was the test method. Like when you go to different heights, you have different amounts of barometric pressure that causes less blood in the tubes, and that will have an effect on your measurements, irrespective of hypoxia. And what we did is we developed a new method how we could measure thrombin generation or blood coagulation out of a finger puncture. So we were not dependent anymore on any tubes. We could just puncture the finger and then we could get a good estimation of a person that would get thrombosis, or maybe a person would get a bleeding phenotype. The second effect that the studies in the past did is you walk to a certain altitude, but when you walk you have physical activity. Physical activity is known to be associated with a slightly higher chance of thrombosis. And that's why we did an expedition where there were two groups, one passive, one active group.
While the inactive group is still fast asleep, the active group is preparing their boots to meet the Alps. Today's goal is a relatively easy walk to Lac des Moissons, a reservoir at 1,970 meters above sea level. The trees and grass gradually disappear with every single meter they cover of today's 746-meter target. The inactive team and the technicians travel by car to Barrage des Moissons. As it is essential for them to be as inactive as possible to get clear test results, the climbing group reaches the first snow of the expedition. Only a few more meters to go, and red will finally be meeting white. The technicians set up the mobile lab, transported in 5 flight cases containing centrifuges, blood analysis equipment, and 6 Synapse hemostasis test kits within 10 minutes. It was only yesterday that they performed the experiment for the first time in a non-controlled, non-laboratory environment. And today, it feels like they've never done it otherwise. The first climbers reach the summit, and they are tested right away in order to observe the effect of exercise. First, they measure the heart rate and saturation. Next, blood is drawn, centrifuged, and divided between the different test methods to study the blood in more detail. To complete the experiment, all the tests are repeated, but now with the members of the passive group in order to see the influence of activity and passivity. The next morning, everything is packed and ready for a 140-kilometer-long journey to Zermatt. As they arrive, the team is quite an attraction. 50 mountaineers, all dressed up, as they pass souvenir shops and restaurants, are even in the famous mountaineering and ski resort of Zermatt, not a corny sight. The weather hasn't worsened yet, so the helicopter can still airlift the equipment to the Ganberg hut. But as the team arrives at Trockenesteg cable car station, the weather turned for the worse. What should have been an easy 15-minute walk towards the Ganberg hut rapidly changed into a, for some members, 60-minute scramble facing rough winter conditions. What turned out to be only the beginning of a severe snowstorm. The logistic and laboratory team rebuilds the lab as fast as possible, as snow and wind have died for a moment. This proves to be more difficult as expected due to the decreased atmospheric pressure and consequently less air and oxygen to breathe. Some members of the team, affected by the lack of oxygen, start to suffer from nausea and mild headaches. To test the effect of exercise at 3,000 meters, a climbing trip is organized to Testegrigia, a rocky prominence above the Theodule Pass, just across the Italian border. Under Arctic-like circumstances, they set out to cover the elevation of 449 meters. Normally, this is a hike of about 90 minutes, but today, the mostly inexperienced climbers battle against a snowstorm, the lack of oxygen, and themselves. they know that their considerable physical activity will probably deliver great blood and oxygen values, which makes this day, in the end, a perfect one. Again, the alpine weather shows no mercy. Today, the group is scheduled to leave the Gandeg hut and head for the next and final experimental height. Heavy winds and snowfall keep the helicopter grounded, and a piste bully is called for to transport the equipment. Initially, the plans are to climb to Klein Matterhorn, but that is considered to be too hazardous for most of the team members. Both the active and the inactive team use the cable car to ascend to the final stage. The laboratory team rebuilds the lab without any problems. Within minutes, they are operational, as seen by Professor Hemke, who is flown in earlier to oversee the progress the team is making. The Klein Matterhorn complex is a relatively modern complex and the end point of the highest cable car station in Europe. The inactive group is clearly enjoying the comfortable environment, reading, resting, and playing card games before being tested for the last time this expedition. The active team is out at the Plateau Rosa Glacier to commit to their daily exercise in the name of science. As they return to Klein Matterhorn, most of them are worn out as the reduced amount of oxygen is starting to affect everyone. Physical activity at an altitude of almost 4,000 meters reduces productivity by up to 50% compared to sea level. For the team of climbers, the last couple of days are quite an achievement. After completing the final tests, the entire team left the mountain for well-deserved dinner and drinks in Zermatt. And today is a special day. Professor Hemke and Rob van der Zande, financial director of Synapse, are invited by Bas de Laat to see the team in action by helicopter. Because of all the last-minute changes due to bad weather, the program was shortened by 1 day, which gives everyone who is in for it, even the members of the inactive team, a chance to climb a 4,000er. The Breithorn, with a height of 4,164 meters, is not a very difficult climb due to the presence of the Klein Matterhorn cable car, which takes climbers to 3,820 meters from Zermatt. An ideal opportunity for many members of the Red Meets White expedition to an experience that will last a lifetime. The first part of the route follows the glacial plateau. The skies are clear and the views are breathtaking. Today, no one suffers from altitude sickness, and all of the 28 members who challenge the 35-degree snow slope that is between them and the summit of the Breithorn reach their goal.
We now found the first clues how hypoxia influences the blood coagulation. And we will go on further investigating this aspect. But at the end, we hope that we can predict who gets thrombosis and who gets not, and also how hypoxia influences patients on the intensive care or in the emergency room. It's amazing what we accomplished. For such a small lab, started with a small plan to test 10 people on altitude, to end up with a big expedition with 6 to 7 mountain guides, 30 volunteers, 6 medical doctors, a camera team documenting everything, and the research was tremendous. We were at 2,000 meters, we already got a report that we had a commentary in Science. I think this expedition was a big success, and I will do it again.